Welcome back to the podcast. Today I am joined by the owner of Alaska Fly Fishing Goods in Juneau, Brad Elfers. How are you, man?
I'm doing well, Jeff. How are you today?
Doing pretty well. I've been paying a little bit of attention to the weather, and it seems like you guys are getting a whole bunch more snow than we are down here in Ketchikan.
Oh, yeah. We are just getting pounded with snow. Like I said, it was our second snowiest start to winter in the last 20 years. So it's just keeps coming. It's kind of great for the skiing end of things, and hopefully it'll be great for the steelhead next spring.
Yeah. Do you do a lot of skiing up there? What do you kind of do in the winter?
Oh, yeah. I ski a lot. So I always have, back in my raft guiding in the summer and then fly fish guiding in the summer, I would keep skiing here in the winter to help make ends meet before I started the shop. So, never quite gotten over that thing. So, yeah, it's a great way to kind of make the short winter days go by.
Yeah. My wife is up here now, and she really enjoyed skiing when she was down in Wyoming, and she has some skis and some skins. So we've done some touring, which is a lot of fun just to kind of get around in some of that backcountry. And so she's been kind of asking a little bit about Eagle Crest, and I don't know if that's like a subtle hint that she wants to go up there and go skiing or what. But we don't have that opportunity down here.
I know that's kind of tough, but at least you got the backcountry stuff. And I'd say if you are coming through Juneau on your way somewhere, you ought to carve out a couple days, particularly this year when it's really, really nice and snowy. So it's a lot of fun.
Yeah, fortunately for us, though, we have a pretty good winter run of steelhead. So it's no place is perfect, and I guess Ketchikan and Juneau it balances out. You guys got the skiing, but we got the winter steelhead.
I know. I've always been envious of you guys there. You just get a little break in the weather, and you can sneak out and go for it. Where it's not really a thing here. It's just does not happen. So we're completely, rods are put away for the year until we break them back out in April. So
what's kind of the last hurrah? It's kind of the dollies. Is it coho? What's the end of the run, and when does that happen up there?
Typically around Juneau. I mean, the coho, the wild fish keep coming in, but the fishing for them really isn't that spectacular late. Like once you get into mid-October, they're really colored up, and they're not very bitey, so they kind of get real salty. And, the dollies being fall spawners, they just kind of disappear. I don't know where the heck they go. Supposedly they go up to the headwaters and spawn, but you just don't find them. So kind of our secret little fall thing is the cutthroat. They are out and about and feeding and taking flies, and, they're on the prowl right up until everything freezes over. So that's usually our last hurrah, is to break out the little rods and go chase them around a bit.
Yeah. Since so much of the water up there, it's I mean, obviously everything is fed by snow melt, but you have a little bit more glacial fed rivers and streams. Or I mean, is that true? Is most of the stuff glacial, and then how does that impact what you're fishing for and impact the seasons?
Yeah, no, for sure. We definitely have, multiple glacial rivers on the roaded area. Plus, we've also got, a couple of them that are, we say semi-glacial, and that probably one of the forks that starts them is glacial. So those ones are more Kenai-like, I like to describe them, in that fish will stay in those rivers, and, dollies will stay in there all summer. Whereas, when you get a full-on glacial river, like the Mendenhall, those fish don't like to be in there for any length of time. And the salmon will pass through them, but they don't want to linger in them. So they're usually going up there kind of looking for a clear water tributary. So, they don't offer much in the way of fishing themselves. It's not out of the question, but it's pretty tough. But if you can find that clear water trib or that mixing zone, then that could be pretty productive. And just about all those glacial rivers do have something of that, coming in that's clear where those fish can, basically they've created a new run there, just in recent memory in some of these rivers, because they were completely glaciated, and as the glaciers have retreated, they've had all these little salmon runs pop up, which is always encouraging to see.
Yeah, for sure. So the Mendenhall is a very, very small river. Do fish find enough of those smaller tributaries off that spawn? Is it significant, or is it just a little here and there, or is it going up into the lake and then going from there?
There's one tributary that's quite well known in Juneau that's called Montana Creek that comes in to the Mendenhall. That's clear water, and that one just is a little fish factory. I mean, it has pinks and chums and dollies and a few cuts and a good coho run. So that thing is a local favorite here in town, and has been a very good fishery for many years. But then some of the fish don't go up there. They go right by it. They go all the way up into Mendenhall Lake, which is also glacial. And there's a tiny little feeder creek that's not open to fishing, but called Steep Creek. And it gets sockeye and it gets coho that go in there. So,
is that the one that's over by the visitor center?
Yeah, exactly. It's over by the visitor center, so people can actually kind of go over the boardwalk, and they have some really cool fish cams too in there. And then the bears love to come in there and prowl around, and they've got a pretty neat setup where the people are on elevated kind of boardwalks, and they can stay out of the way of the bears but still see them roaming around. It's a good thing because it's such a heavily visited area. It kind of keeps the bears and the people from having unpleasant interactions.
Yeah, you don't want that. So what about Auk Lake? Because Auk Lake is in a different. It's not in the same runoff area, right? Is that more clear? Are there resident fish in there?
Yeah, the Auk Lake is 100% clear, and has a tiny little feeder creek that actually, if anything, is kind of drying up. We still have a lot of glacial rebound going on up here, where that land is actually still rising after the weight of the last glaciation has moved on and has receded. Although it's been hundreds of years, the land's still actively going up. And so Auk Creek is not much of a fish stream anymore, the one that goes into the lake. But, it gets a sockeye run, and apparently those sockeye spawn in the lake, a lot of them. There's enough upwelling where they can lay their eggs on basically the gravel on the shores of the lake and still have those eggs remain viable. So, and it's got a lot of cutthroat and some dollies. It gets a little bit of everything going in there. So the other really interesting part of Auk Lake is there's been a weir on Auk Lake, I think since the early 1970s, and they count every single fish that goes in. But not only that, they put the weir in typically in February or March, and they count every salmon fry that goes out. So
oh, wow.
They're counting inch-long pink fry as they go out. So they have some really amazing data going back, but we also use it as an indicator. So when we see all the dollies start bailing out of Auk Lake in mass, which is usually at the beginning of May, then we know they're bailing out of all the lakes on the road system.
Makes sense.
And shoreside fishing's about to get real good at that point. So that's kind of that's what lets us know that it's time to get out and get after it.
Yeah. Is there any ice fishing around there?
Very little. People do a little bit, but typically we're still a little too much in the whole freeze-thaw thing around here,
right? Where
the lakes get kind of sketchy. They get overflow a lot on top of the ice when they do ice up. So it's not a real big thing in Juneau. I think if we had better ice like they do, when you get up into the interior, then more people would do it. But it's pretty rare to see anyone out there doing that.
Yeah, I would be very, very hesitant to go out on ice. And up there, you're seeing pictures of people that are going out and, in the Mat-Su Valley, Kenai Peninsula, places like that are going out on the ice. And, after a long time of temperatures not getting above 15 to 20, you start getting a couple couple nice inches and maybe a foot or so, but even then, I don't know if I would ever drive a vehicle out on there.
Yeah, they're not shy about doing it up there. Those work out most of the time.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, it would make me awfully nervous too. So, but I think that the fly angler and me, I just need to move around a little bit more than typically for ice fishing. So I think I'd probably put that in the same category as like trolling for salmon, which I just I get it, but I can't do it myself.
Yeah.
I just get too itchy. So
yeah. So speaking of up north, one of the reasons I want to have you on is kind of recap my Kenai Peninsula experience, and just kind of talk about some things with you. For a wedding present, a good friend of mine bought your, I don't know if it was like the King Salmon fly box kit or...
I believe it was.
Yeah. So there was 40 some flies in there, which was awesome. Just a huge variety, different colors, a bunch of stuff. And then I got an Echo SR 10 foot 10 weight switch rod. 8 weight, 10 foot 10 inch 8 weight. And then I got Lamson Guru reel. So I was totally ready for this thing. But it's tough to fish up there.
That it is.
Yeah, I don't know if I've ever felt like more prepared, but also overwhelmed, or I don't know. You know that the glory days of the Kenai River when you're picking up 60 pounders like nothing. You're just hoping for an 80 pounder or something like that. Obviously, those days are gone. But man, I knew there was going to be crowds. I knew it was going to be combat fishing. But when we fished the Kasilof, we did not see one other person fishing with a fly rod. Maybe one day there was someone else out there, but like there was no one fishing with fly rods, and it was kind of just sad. I had any fly that I could have wanted to. I had sink tips, and I was any color, any shade, anything I could have felt like I wanted. Casting great. A couple people said, "Man, you and your wife, you guys are great job out there casting. It looks really beautiful." I'm like, I hope so, because not much was happening.
Yeah. That's tough. I mean, I completely can empathize with the situation you were in there, Jeff, in that it's the Kenai itself, as well as, Kasilof and Deep Creek and those types of spots that are just down the peninsula. Boy, it's not straightforward fishing, especially the Kenai. And there are certainly the guys who are guides up there, and the guys and girls, I should say, who really know that river. They can find some kings on the fly sometimes. And, I would talk to them, and sometimes they'd be out there fishing at just, super early before there were boats running up and down the river, because, that really puts the kings down as soon as there's boats driving over them.
Yeah.
It just, and everything really has to come together in order for you to, be in a spot where you've got kings, where those kings are happy and they want to eat a fly, and of course the sheer number of people fishing there is unbelievable. And then probably this year too, I mean, I just from my anecdotal experience at my shop, talking to people from the lower 48 who had been cooped up now for over a year and were just dying to get out fishing. They were coming to Alaska this year. And you probably saw that. They came in force. Yeah. And a lot of them, if they're not going out to a fancy place in Bristol Bay or something, they're kind of doing a DIY thing, and they're doing it on the Kenai. So, I'm sorry to hear that it didn't turn out better results. But that situation is certainly one where I've been in there too, and then wow, I don't know this river real well, and it's going to be real tough without some local knowledge or a guide before I have a shot at. I mean, that's just rainbow fishing, let alone kings.
Yeah, so, there was never a point really where neither my wife or I just thought, hey, well, let's try something different. Let's do let's rent a rod and let's try to do the flossing thing. Like we were fully sold on the fly fishing, and it was, maybe a little bit frustrating, but it was fun to get there super early, and it was kind of spooky or eerie when we got there on the Kasilof before, there were some people, but not a lot. And then just to start seeing these silent drift boats just emerge from the fog, it was like some quiet invasion of the river. And then everyone was back trolling on there, so you just know there's a lot of commotion in the water. And then more people start showing up. But we chose a spot that had some pretty good swinging water, that there wasn't a whole lot of people around, so we don't know if it was just kind of tough for them to use their method or what it was, but it was nice that we had some space to at least cast, and like you feel like you're fishing, you have all the room you want, and there's about 100 yards we just kind of had to ourselves, so we may have looked like fools, but it was still pretty fun. And then the Kenai, not nearly as much access, and that was a tough thing. But we caught some nice rainbows on a float trip, and that was cool on the fly. It was bobber fishing, but it's still fun to get some of those really nice rainbows. And so we do want to go back and fish both again at some point. Maybe not super soon, but it was definitely worth going back and trying to figure things out a little bit.
Yeah, it's the Kenai is it's its own thing. There's nothing else like it in Alaska, and there is something compelling about it when you're there. And it's like you said, when you're fishing rainbows, you're fishing out of a boat, and you're basically bobber fishing. But my God, who knows what kind of a size rainbow you could hook into, and you're gonna catch some fish if you're particularly with a guide. But yeah, if you get back up there in September or first half of October, that can just be some spectacular rainbow fishing. But I have done the thing where I went up there, and a friend of mine lived up in the Matsu, and he came down with his raft, and we floated it. We did okay, but the guides up there are really, or if you know a local who's quite proficient on the river, it's just like those fish sit in some spots and they don't sit in other spots, and it takes a little while to learn where those spots are. So. Yeah,
having someone that knows and can kind of show you, that was the biggest thing when I was maybe second year up here. A buddy took me to this. Well, we kind of became friends through fishing, and he took me to a spot to fish for steelhead, and just the way he fished certain things, it looked like good water, but you're talking 2 or 3 feet can make such a big difference, especially when the water is a little bit cold and they might not be moving as much. And just how you fish it, and just being diligent. Like he was hitting the spot. He just adjusted a little bit. Then all of a sudden he starts hooking up, and you think, oh man, that's how you got to fish it. The whole idea that, there's no steelhead here. Like, no, they're probably there. You just got to fish it correctly, and it's kind of a fun puzzle to figure out.
It is. And I remember when I was first kind of new to Alaska too, I was fishing steelhead with a friend, and it was kind of before strike indicators were really a thing. But you were throwing your fly upstream and throwing a big mend in there and trying to get it to drift down. And this guy I was with was catching fish, and I was not. And then he finally told me later, he said, every time you would throw too many mends in there, you were pulling your fly away from the bank. And those fish were just like locked up against the bank. So he was able to stay in the zone actually by not mending as much. So, it was just little things like that it's kind of the difference between catching and not catching.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
So, as far as fishing up north goes, did you do much on the upper part of the Kenai? Because we found that to be just a real good time. You could fish more from shore. There's more public access, and you can do some wading, and got some nice rainbows. Not as big, but we really like the upper Kenai much more than the lower.
Yeah, it's and they kind of break it up into different sections. Of course, the upper is coming out of Kenai Lake and is right there at Cooper Landing. And that is just a beautiful section, and it's one you probably could float quite easily on your own, even if you weren't an expert. I mean, you should have some knowledge of rowing. That's a really nice area, and there are some really nice fish in there for sure. So a little more access. Still, it does seem like finding many spots to fish off the bank is kind of tough since those fish are often sitting out a little ways and eating eggs where you're trying to get a good dead drift going, which is certainly a lot easier in a boat than it is out for shore.
Yeah.
And there's some of those fantastic little back channels and little braids that break off. And my gosh, sometimes those things are just loaded with rainbows, and you won't see a whole lot of other anglers back in there. And then you can go in there and get out of your boat and kind of wade up and down the bank a bit. So that's pretty neat. All that fishing. And then they call it the middle Kenai, which, the Kenai then flows into Ski-Lac Lake, which is just enormous. Thing that looks like an ocean sometimes. And then where it flows back out of Ski-Lac Lake, they call that the middle Kenai, where it flows down. And there's no exact set place where they then call it the lower. And the lower is really much more down by Soldotna, and it's kind of the king fishing spots. It's much more sloughy, big water, back trolling. But that middle section coming out of Ski-Lac Lake, it does have some enormous rainbows in it, but it's, to me, it seems like really, really hard place to fish unless you have a boat and you can be out in the middle of it. So, yeah, I agree. Up there is certainly probably the most fly fishing friendly shore angler. Feels more like you're fishing a river as opposed to like a gigantic river.
Mm-hmm. We got motored up to the middle when we were out with the guide, and it was, I think, maybe the second day that it had been open to motors. So pretty much everybody was motoring up there. And I thought this is great because it looked like there was some access, but you couldn't get like from a road into that spot. So we couldn't try to recreate the experience that we were having because we weren't too far from shore, but it was just, there was no way that you could drive out the road the next day somewhere and then start hiking and try to find the same spot. It was just not going to happen. So that was kind of disappointing, but yeah, we definitely got some nice rainbows there. Yeah, for sure. And it is. I think it's tough access, and some of the access points too that I've seen in some of those areas. I mean, you're kind of be like walking down a slough that's just like brown bear central. So it's kind of like, oh man, I don't know if I really want to do that. So yeah, that was another thing that was different. Sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I was just saying, access on the Kenai. I mean, there's just a lot of private property and a lot of kind of hard, like. It's hard to get your bearings for how you would actually get there. So
yeah, the other thing that was a little bit kind of unnerving for us was just the brown bear potential. You grow up on Prince of Wales Island, we're used to black bears, and here around Ketchikan, we're used to black bears, and just the possibility of a brown bear being around, and they're definitely around. Just making noise and things like that, and we did a hike to Ski-Lac, didn't fish, but just kind of did a hike, and we're looking over just beautiful mountain range and everything. And I think a week after we left, someone had been attacked. They had a dog with him or something like that, and the guy got bit in his forearm. And I don't know if it was the exact same spot or the same trail, but you just think, man, like they're around. Like the chances of having an encounter is probably very, very low. The chance of having an encounter that ends in any sort of attack or any sort of contact is probably even lower. But, it's definitely in the back of your mind if you are, like you said, kind of snaking your way through these sloughs or some of this back stuff. It's something. Yeah.
I mean, there's just no way a river that's got that many salmon in it isn't going to have some just whopping big brown bears up there. And you just don't want to surprise one or something like that, but it's a pretty spectacular place. You just have to go up there, I think, with the attitude that this place is going to be busy, there's going to be people around, but I'm going to go up there and join the party, so to speak. So,
yeah.
I think it's fun.
Yeah. So. Have you done much out in the Bristol Bay area?
I have. I always want to do more, but I try to get out there every other year or so, and typically do a float trip with friends. We just kind of do a DIY and usually fly out either Bethel or Dillingham or King Salmon, and then float down the river for a week or so and camp along the way and fish. And I really enjoy doing that. That's a great way to get out in the country, and the fishing's spectacular most of the time anyway. And it's that's a favorite thing of mine to do.
Do you do some of that mouse stuff? It seems like a really hip thing to do. Just mouse fishing, just twitching or bringing those things across and getting some huge rainbows.
Yeah, it's really, the mousing season really is basically, you can divide the trout season into mousing and streamers and that kind of stuff, which they'll take in late June and most of July. And then as soon as the salmon are in and they start dropping eggs, it gets real hard to get them to come up for a mouse anymore. They just get on the egg flesh thing. Not that you can't, but it's just August is hard to get them to eat mice. But I've had some spectacular trips where they really were into the mouse, and it's pretty hard to take that fly off. Even if you catch more of them on a Dalai Lama, just seeing those repeated takes and having them come out and crush it, and and it's not just rainbows, it's like dollies eat them, and railing will eat mice too. It's like, wow, I didn't know they were so ambitious, but they go for it. That's a lot of protein, I guess.
Yeah. What is your favorite fly? I know it's such a difficult question to ask because, you're talking rainbows in the southeast, you're talking rainbows on the Kenai, rainbows, more in the interior, but is there a pattern that you just love to fish or always use if you can?
Well, yeah, I mean, this is not going to be an original answer at all. I'm going to apologize that right now, but if I don't know what they want to eat, I'm tying on a black and white Dalai Lama, and they're going to eat it. And it's unbelievable how many different parts of the state that fly works in, and just how effective it is, especially when it's like not obvious what they want to be eating. It's just a tremendous searching fly. So yeah, I fish that one a lot, but then of course I like to mix it up. And on those float trips, although bead fishing is super effective, I'll usually have a rod strung up with a bead, but then I'll have another rod strung up with streamers or something like that, because I'd probably rather not watch an indicator if I could get them to take something on the swing or take a mouse. Or even occasionally they'll eat big dry flies up there. So, it's just fun playing with all the different stuff that they might want to eat.
Yeah. Have you done much like warm water fishing? One of my favorite things is just plopping down a hopper next to some shore and hoping there's a brown trout there.
To be perfectly honest, Jeff, I have not done a tremendous amount of kind of classic Rocky Mountain West hopper fishing, all the hatches, that kind of stuff. I really came into my fly fishing up in Alaska. I fly fished some down in Washington State where I grew up, but it frankly wasn't particularly great fishing. It wasn't, Montana, Idaho, Colorado good fishing. So most of what I've done is up here. So I really don't have a ton of experience with that stuff. And, once I open the fly shop, it's like, well, now my summers are not really mine to go down to the lower 48 and go fishing. So, yeah.
You don't endure the winters up here to just leave for the summers. You paid the price, you might as well reap the rewards. But yeah, it is fun to go out and see some of those other things, but it is somewhat of a sacrifice. It's fun to experience that. And it is just so different, when you're seeing a trout rise to a dry fly, and it's a different type of fun than hooking a king, trolling or mooching or anything like that. Like, well, 60-pound king is a 60-pound king, or I haven't caught a 60-pounder, but a nice 35, 45-pound king, you're gonna have a lot of meat. It's gonna be great picture, but I don't know, seeing something rise to a dry fly, whether it be a grasshopper pattern in Montana or stripping a mouse across the surface, it's just also different and also fun. It's fun to have experiences, but having a couple of different things dialed in is a lot of fun. And if trout fishing up here and salmon fishing up here is your thing, like, it's tough to leave.
It kind of is, and I would love to do more of that, because I'm certainly not trying to make any kind of disparaging remarks about that, because it's kind of, I've been on some days, guided trips. My wife was going to graduate school back east in Connecticut. she was going in Massachusetts, but I drove down to Connecticut where there's some very good trout fishing. And oh my God, the hatch would go off at, 10:30 in the morning or whatever time it was. And I had a guide with me, and, you cast your tiny little dry fly out there, but I was like, how on earth do I tell which one's my fly and which one's a real bug? Because there's so many out there. And he'd be like yelling at me to set the hook, and I was like looking at something that wasn't even my fly.
Yeah.
Missing them left and right. So yeah, it was a whole different game. But then, the hatch was over at whatever time, 1 p.m, and he's like, "Yep, that's it for dries for the day." He said, "How do you feel about casting streamers?" I was like, "Well, that's what I'm good at, actually."
Yeah.
So that sounds real good to me.
Yeah. I saw on the Fall River in Northern California, we had that. There was like a shoulder season special at this little lodge thing. So we just got the bunkhouse, which was like the employee quarters. So it was cheap and we could afford it, but it was size 22. And just like, man, really this thing, so you have to go super light tippet. And then they said, go to the river and fish this, from 10:30 to 10:45. I thought, oh, really? 15 minutes? Yeah, I just thought this person was being elitist or pretentious or something like that, and it just 10:30, it just started, and it was crazy, and I had no clue where my fly was. Everything was just exploding all around it. I would just set the hook, nothing, and then at 10:45, just like that, turned off, and it was over, and I thought, what is going on? And crazy, absolutely crazy.
Yeah, that's just all so much fun. So the breadth of experiences you can have is pretty amazing.
Mm. So as a shop owner, I'm sure you've seen a lot of things, fads and whatnot come and go, and over your kind of fly fishing life, where have been some of the biggest advances? Has it been like advances in flies, rods, reels, waders? Like, where have you seen the biggest growth?
I would say, 'cause that's super interesting just to watch things. I've had the shop for coming up on 23 years here. Just to see, they tend to go in like quantum leaps. Like you have a quantum leap in quality, and then it's just little teeny incremental leaps for like 5 or 6 years, and then another quantum leap, where it's just like, oh my goodness. And, but the one thing that, probably anglers of our generation who knew the joys of fishing in neoprene waders, and by joys, I'm of course being facetious because it's horrible. If there's one thing that I would not go back to, I would go back to, even if I had to fish a fiberglass rod and a Kluger Medalist reel, I would do that before I would give up my Gore-Tex waders. That's probably the thing that, throughout the day keeps you the most comfortable, and the technology has gotten so good, and they breathe so well, and they just have gotten so much more durable. That's probably the most amazing, like going from 1998 when Gore-Tex waders were pretty awful. They hadn't quite gotten them figured out yet. We used to joke they would just leak right out of the box, because you'd kneel down and the water would actually like shove, would get pushed through the Gore-Tex in reverse. It wasn't quite there. But once they got it figured out, they're amazing. And probably the other couple of things is the flies have gotten so much better. And that goes entirely to just the angling community in general, because these are all invented by and large, by non-professionals. They're just people who have come out with something that's just better than the last one. And, the flies we fished with in the 90s were just way, way less effective than the stuff that you can get these days that, has so much more jigging motion to it, or, even the dry flies that have incorporated synthetics in them so they float so much better. And it's pretty amazing to see how creative people are in their tying, and how that then, kind of gets dispersed out to the great wide world. So those are a couple of my favorite things.
Yeah. With flies, it seems interesting. Like, you can have really beautiful flies, but that doesn't necessarily mean they're going to be better. But
Yeah.
what you were saying, as far as like, especially with dry flies and using synthetics and things like that, like, is there still a market for, or are people still being, tricked into buying flies that look really good, but it really doesn't help at all? Is just salesmanship there, or are the flies like by and large way, way, way like actually that much better?
You know, some of the most effective ones these days are not by any means the most beautiful flies. And some of these flies that have, it would take you 30 minutes to tie one of them, and then you promptly lose it on a stump with swinging it across the river. I don't know that they fish all that much better than their compatriot that's, tied out of rabbit strips and a big cone head. So I don't think that, but we always find it's weird that there are some of these flies that just look fantastic. And you look at them and you go, oh my God, that thing's going to catch fish. And they just don't. And they're very popular for a year or two. And then I think everybody fishes them and they don't catch much. And then, so we're all sometimes kind of on the learning curve together, because I certainly don't want to be putting flies in my bins at the shop that aren't good.
Yeah.
Sometimes you bring in stuff and you're like, oh, that's going to kill it. And then it doesn't.
Yeah. Some of those ones with like the silly legs and the squid roe, they just look so shrimpy and so, like there's no way, like I want to eat this thing. It looks so, so good. And I think sometimes that makes you fish it harder and better because you're confident with it. So maybe it's not necessarily the fly, it's the attitude with which you fish it, which can make a big difference.
Yeah, there is some of that for sure. And then also these flies can be like hyper-regional, and by that I mean that there are flies that just crush it here in Southeast Alaska, anywhere along the coast, all the way up through Cordova, out to Kodiak. They're just wicked, and they don't work for beans up in Bristol Bay. And oftentimes it's more the color than it is the actual pattern. But, there's a couple of flies that came out of Bristol Bay from some really good lodge fly tires, like guys who are guides that were really good, and they work great up there, and I can't catch anything with them down here. So, I sometimes it's just like, well, maybe that's a great fly on that river, but it doesn't work on this river.
Yeah,
So
I found
it keeps it interesting.
Sometimes size is the biggest thing. You have this awesome, great-looking steelhead fly that just looks every bit like a steelhead fly should work or look, but then it just doesn't work, and you just do the same color, but just much, much smaller, and you end up getting strikes. You just kind of wonder, well, why is that? I mean, the color's the same. Is it really just about size? Like, what happened here? Or did the size change the action or anything like that? It's very curious and interesting that they would have, rivers where it would work and rivers that wouldn't, but it's, again, part of that puzzle.
Yeah, and steelhead too. I mean, they take everything to another level of why on earth did they eat that and not this? And it's like every water level and temperature change with those fish that can just drive you bad, and trying to figure out why they don't want to eat or why they do want to eat. And it's pretty fun, but it's it's a little maddening at times too.
Yeah. As far as rods and reels go, what have you seen as far as, big advances? Like once things kind of went to graphite, was that kind of the huge jump? Is it, is there a lot of room for improvement at this point, or is it hard to imagine that it could get much better than what we have here?
Yeah, I always hate to say that, but when they went from fiberglass to graphite in the early 80s, late 70s, early 80s, that was a pretty big jump in just rods that, were more responsive and were easier to cast. But then it seemed like all the way through, they got incrementally better as we got into the 90s, but they were still kind of, for lack of a better word, they were kind of clubby. They were sort of heavy. The ferrules were really thick, so that was back when people still liked two-piece rods, because when you have thick ferrules, you can really feel each one of them on the rod, so it doesn't feel like one smooth casting motion. It feels like, oh God, I've got 4 chunks of rod here. And then Sage came out with a rod called the XP in the late 1990s, and they just hit it out of the park with that thing. It was lighter. The ferrules were super fine. And I still have a couple of them that I just refuse to get rid of. And they were the predecessor to everything that's come since then, of these very responsive, light, durable, but really just beautiful casting rods. And you know, in many ways, I think that's helped fly fishing grow, in that you don't have to spend the first 3 years of your fly fishing career just trying to get a 40-foot cast down, because these rods, if you're even in the ballpark of doing the right thing, will at least get you in the game of making the cast to get it out there. So yeah, the rods, but where they go from here is kind of, it does seem like the entry and mid-level rods are getting better and better, you know, because your top-end rods now they're pushing $1,000.
Yeah.
So we're starting to see them backfill a little bit, and now there's this like a whole lot of rods that are in that $450 to $650 range. So coming in at, you know, half the price of a top-end rod, that are not that far down the ladder in terms of quality. And maybe 5 years ago or so, they would have been the top end rod. So it's kind of nice to see how they're really kind of the rising tide is bringing all these rods up in their quality.
Yeah, it's interesting to see when things get discontinued, and you kind of wonder, well, why are you discontinuing it, and the new thing that's replacing it, is it really an improvement, or are you just rebranding it so that, you know, you can sell more? Because money is not in the one thing that lasts forever. You know, money is in the consumable thing. It's in the replace this because, you know, it's a little bit better, or the name's changed a little bit. But
yeah, no, I think it is a mix. I mean, on the one hand, the fly fishing industry is not nearly as shameless as, for instance, the ski industry, which, you know, every year they put a new top plate on their skis with a different color, and it's the exact same ski underneath for 4 years in a row. But they, you know, they make everything obsolete every year. So I mean, that's pretty shameless, I think. They don't really do that in fly fishing. When it's a new rod, it's a whole new rod. It may have characteristics of a previous one, but it's not going to be the same rod with a new paint job. And typically, you know, I would say like brands like Sage or Loomis or Scott, I mean, you're going to be looking at, you know, a good 4, 5, 6 years of, you know, this is our best rod and we're sticking with it, before they come up with something that is noticeably better and then discontinue that rod. So, which I like, and I appreciate that, because nobody wants to feel like they just bought the latest and greatest and then, you know, 8 months later find out that it's not.
Yeah.
But they're continually working to make rods lighter and easier to cast, and I just wonder how far can they go with that. So. Yeah,
I would kind of watch some of those, the professional bass tour, the Bassmasters, and look at all these spin rod fishermen who had, you know, 5 or 6 or 7 different rods. You're just like, look at those people. Do you really need that? But you know, you see it in fly fishing starting to really happen too. You have a specific rod that can meet a specific fish, and it does make a huge difference. When I visited a buddy that lives in California, and he bought a boat, so he was doing a lot of that really good bass and striper fishing on the Delta with his fly rods, and he'd have 4 or 5 different rods ready to go, and they're just rigged up, and they just fish different. It really does make a huge difference. And I got to cast his Sage X. Was it the X?
Yeah, that's their big dog right now.
Yeah, that thing was awesome.
Oh man.
Wow. Yeah, it was a 10 weight, because you gotta huck some big stuff, and you know, you have a chance at, you know, 20, 30 pound stripers, which is pretty sweet. We didn't catch anything very big, but yeah, in order to double haul, like, you need some. That thing is a brute, but you know, you don't feel like you need rotator cuff surgery at the end of the day. It was amazing how you could chuck those things and still feel pretty good about it.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
And you know, I've always been a proponent of, you know, you don't have to have top end gear to go out and play. I mean, that's you know, I've never liked it when some shops try to make you feel like you know, unless you're buying the top, you can't be in the game. That's just not true. But on the other hand, the top stuff is unbelievable.
Yeah.
As you saw when you cast that Sage X. I mean, you don't have to have it, but oh my God, it is worth it if it's in the wheelhouse of something that you can afford.
Yeah.
It's worth every penny, but I get it that it's a whole bunch of pennies.
Yeah. Yeah, you have to fish enough to be able to know what you want in another rod, or what you want, what you like this rod, but it could be this, or it could be maybe a little bit longer, a little bit more responsive or something like that. So then when you do upgrade from the starter or that middle of the road, you want something that's more like this, and then you can sense the difference. Otherwise, you just bought a $1,000 rod, you don't know why, and you don't know why it's better than the $300 starter.
Right, or you may have found that the rod you bought maybe wasn't quite what you wanted to do. For instance, if I was doing a lot of steelhead fishing, I like a little softer rod so I can roll cast it, and that's as you know, Jeff. That's what we do in Southeast Alaska, because we can't backcast very often because of all the brush behind us.
Mm-hmm.
So that might be a little longer rod. Maybe it's a 10-foot rod, or maybe it's a switch rod that's like that 8-weight that you have. I mean, that's a beautiful rod for steelheading. But if I'm going to be launching flies off the beach for cohos, well, that might be a different 8-weight rod than the one I just described. It might be faster action, and I'm casting in the wind, and so it's just kind of thinking about or talking to the local shop about what I want to do and what rod would be a good match for that.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Well, that's a perfect lead-in. Can you? What would you kind of recommend, and what do you have available in the shop for someone who's looking to either upgrade their steelhead game for this spring, or just get into it? What would you recommend?
Oh gosh, there's so many fabulous rods out there, and so much of it has to do with what you can afford and what makes sense, so that it's something that you're not upgrading 6 months into the game where you're like, oh, I wish I bought something better the first go round. But a lot of these rods, are just wonderful casting rods, and a lot of the ones that are in the entry level, which might be in that kind of $200 to $400 range, are very, they're multi-purpose, which is nice. They're usually soft enough where you can kind of get the feel of casting. They're not so stiff that it's hard, and then they're soft enough so you can roll cast. So, that could be like the Echo Boost is a very popular rod in that price range, and the Sage Foundation is another one that are, not terribly expensive, but something that somebody who's getting into it could feel good about having and know they're going to fish it for a number of years. And be able to cast it pretty easily, and know that it has a lifetime guarantee. So if they go out there and accidentally have a little accident, which does happen, that you pay the fee and you get the get out of jail card. So.
Mm-hmm. And what would be the difference between you kind of touched on it a little bit with some of the inability to backcast in some of these Southeast Alaska rivers, but a single-handed rod for steelhead versus a switch rod for steelhead down here?
Sure. Yeah. A switch rod is, of course, for if people aren't familiar with them, they're basically halfway between a single hand, for instance, 9-foot rod, and a spay rod, which, is going to be 12.5 feet and up. So these usually clock in at somewhere in the neighborhood of 10.5 or 11 feet. And you can cast them single hand, just like a regular rod, or you can cast them with two hands, like a spay rod, as well as, a whole bunch of other techniques. Typically, though, I don't usually recommend people jump right into a switch rod if they haven't really fly fished before, because they take just a little bit of a feel, because they feel there's a lot more rod out there, and they can be a little unmanageable and unwieldy if you've never done it before. Which, if you're willing to jump in there, that's okay. You can. But rank beginner probably would have a little more difficulty getting it figured out. So that I usually recommend people just starting out, start with something in that 9-foot range, and, like an 8-weight, because they can use that for everything. They can go steelhead fishing, they can go coho fishing, they can go hopefully catch a whole bunch of pink salmon when they're in, and heck, you can even catch dollies and cuts, and it's overkill, but at least you can do it all.
Mm-hmm.
But if you already have a little experience and you want to give switches a try, they're a ton of fun, as you probably found. And they're great for swinging flies. They're great for nymphing. You can roll cast with all that length. You can roll cast a long way. And so it's kind of counterintuitive that on a small stream you'd want a longer rod, but that's actually can be really helpful when you just don't have the ability to throw a back cast because you're just going to throw it into the bushes behind you. So, yeah, a 7 or 8 week switch is a lot of fun for a lot of our southeast fishing.
Yeah, and then reel. Some people would think that the technology in the rod, because that's what you're casting. So if you're going to be cheap on something, just get any old cheap reel to put on there. What would you say to someone who wants to go really, really cheap on a reel, or what would you say to someone or who's asking about how important a good reel is?
Yeah, I usually start off with, if you're just targeting cutthroat or Dolly Varden, you probably could get away with a very inexpensive reel because they don't really put any stress on the reel, and you're typically fishing in the fresh water. So what the heck, go for it. And I will say though, like I have folks that get some of these starter packages that have about, I'm going to say about a $50 reel in them, and they get them for an 8 weight. So they're going out and chasing cohos, and those things are going to last a matter of months, not years, because they're just not designed to have a violent 14-pound fish tearing at their inside. And Alaska just puts an amount of stress on reels. It's unbelievable. In that, one, you have big fish. Two, we all seem to have like tons of either grit or sand or glacial silt that just gets into everything. We have salt water. And then the final thing is you're probably not going to go out and catch one fish a day. I mean, if you're out there, you might catch, if you're catching pinks, you might catch 15 of them. Or if you're catching cohos, you can catch multiple fish in a day. So, everything you're doing is just multiplying stress on that reel. So the cheap ones get exposed pretty quickly. We had a photo years ago. I don't know if I still have it around, but it was our garbage can at the shop in the middle of coho season, and it must have had a half dozen reels people brought in that had been destroyed by cohos. So, I mean, the handles breaking off, or the reel foot breaking off, and then the reel falling, on the beach, and it was pretty funny.
Nice.
They were cheap old reels, and people were okay with it. They were like, okay, I guess that was my hint that I need to step it up a little.
Yeah.
So yeah, it was pretty funny. But yeah, it's probably, if you're buying an 8 weight, you might want to invest in at least a moderately good reel, or expect to be buying a new one in short order.
Mm-hmm. And then fly line, what do you got for that?
Fly lines have just gotten incredibly good, and probably for the last, I'll admit, when I first started the shop, I probably didn't think about fly lines as much as I should have. It was like, all right, we'll put a weight forward floating on there, and you'll be good. And people were fine, but the lines have gotten so much better, and then we're finding, as we have gotten more into it, certain rods really just match up with a certain line, and they go from good to just exceptional. So, some of these tapers, they may all be like offshoots of a weight forward line, where they're, larger in diameter on the front 30 to 40 feet. But the way the weight is distributed in there, perhaps they have like a little double bump in terms of, they get fat, and then right towards the tip, they get even fatter again to help turn over the fly. Some of these lines, and if you get the right one on that rod, which we play around a bunch at the shop trying to find, which rods and which lines like each other, it's incredible how much a line can make a difference, just in kind of making that rod really sing and really zip the fly out there, and make you look like a superstar when you're casting. So that's all good stuff.
Nice. And then as far as flies go, you guys have full on little kits or little what do you call them on there? Just like boxes of pre-stock stuff that should work. And like I said, that king salmon stuff, such a variety. I felt that colors and sizes and patterns were all represented there. So I definitely felt well armed. Do you have those for steelhead too?
We do. We kind of hang our hat on our flies. That's kind of what we're the most proud of. And, one of my longtime employees there, Mike Cole, has been designing and coming up with just some amazing flies for years. And we pack up all kinds of different fly selections, but we try to make them really specific so that they're not just general vague ones where half of them are useless, and for instance, when your friends called Jeff and said, "Oh, I want to get a king salmon selection for Jeff," well, we're like, "Well, where's he going?" Because that's going to make a difference on what we put in the box. So we trick them out too, and so we tried to trick them out for that Kenai type area. And people always they'll just pop in the little customer notes when they're checking out. They're like, "Oh, these boxes are for a trip. I'm going such and such a place," and then we can put maybe just trade a few flies in and out so it's a little more customized for them. But yeah, we do that stuff for steelhead, and gosh, that's coming up before we know it. We're going to be into steelhead season.
Yeah, goes quick. Well, we're coming up on an hour here, man. I really appreciate everything that you provided. Always great to talk to you. Could you have a little pitch for the store? Where can people find stuff? Do you have anything going on?
Oh, well, if you're not in Juneau, which I know lots of people aren't, of course, we're a small town, it's AlaskaFlyFishingGoods.com, and we got everything on there. And we always encourage people to reach out to us, too, because I know coming to Alaska, it's confusing as heck as to what you actually need because it's such different flies. So, we're always happy to help people get the right stuff so that, when they go on that, really dream trip, that they've got the right stuff. Or if they're being guided, the guide opens the boxes like, "Oh yeah, this is good stuff." That's what makes us the happiest. So yeah, reach out and we'll be happy to help.
Awesome. Well, thanks again, man. Really appreciate it. Look forward to seeing some pictures of some nice spring steelhead this year.
I know, man, and hopefully you guys will get a break in the weather down there and be able to get out, and you can send me a picture. I'll be dying to see some steelhead photos in February when we're still locked in the deep freeze up here.
Yeah, I would love to make you jealous. That's one of the goals.
Yeah. Sounds good to me.
All right, cool. Take care.
All right, you too. Bye.